Welcome to Black Mental Health Matters. My name is Madison McNair, and I am the show host for today. And we are going to be talking about colorism and its effects on Black girls and their self esteem. We are streaming live to the United States of Africa, the Black Mental Health YouTube channel, and LinkedIn Live. We are pleased to have the following panel members join us. Welcome, Dr. Pia L. Scott, Annette Adoyobo, apologies if I pronounced that wrong, and Dr. Rhonda Shirley. How are we all doing today? Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, so let's get started. Our first question is open to anyone who wants to start, and we're just going to talk about what experiences you've had with colorism growing up.
I'll start. So for me, colorism really started at a young age. I'm 24 for context, so not that long, but long enough. And so I grew up in Canada for the first half of my life. And even though I had a very racially diverse group of students in my class, there were still different experiences that happened that kind of made me aware that, maybe I am darker than other people. So some of my white friends would come back from vacation and, be like, oh, hey, look, Annette, I'm almost as dark as you. And I'm like, okay. Or some of my other Black friends would try to see who's the darkest in the group or who's the lightest in the group. And so that was when I became a little bit more aware of just, me being on the darker skinned side. But once I moved to the US and started going to middle school and high school, that was when it really, started to take a toll on me, because I was noticing that there was preference for lighter skin. There was preference for those Eurocentric features. And so that's when I started, straightening my hair, listening to certain music, because I knew I couldn't change my skin tone. Like that was not going to happen. So my goal was if I could look as similar to those who were preferred, then I would be given that same treatment. And little did I know that that was going to, take a toll on me come college, when now everybody's kind of figured themselves out or is now, embarking on that journey. And now I'm not only having to figure out who I am and who I've been created to be, but I'm having to dismantle all of those negative stereotypes about myself so that I could become, my true self. So it started quite young for me, around age 9 or 10. And I don't think I really came to a point where I appreciated and loved who I was until middle of college. And that was just a few years ago. So,
Wow.
Yeah.
I would say for me, I think it's always been there, but as you grow and as you get older, those things that happened to you when you were younger, as you learn and you grow, you say, wait a minute, okay, that's what that was. Microaggression or someone saying that, hey, oh, you're dark skinned, you're pretty to be dark skinned. What does that mean? Why can't I just be pretty or beautiful? Why does it have to relate to skin tone? And for me, it affected me more so as I got a little bit older. When we're talking about dating, and I'm in my 30s. So when we're talking about dating, you always see the preference for lighter skin, and or the straight hair. Because even within the context of hair, if you are darker skin and you have that 4C hair, you're perceived as, not attractive, not beautiful. And even in my travels, I've traveled to other countries where I was blatantly discriminated against versus my lighter skin cousin. And so it really put a lot of things in perspective for me, that it was important that I took care of my own mental health and that I poured into myself, that even though these things happen, I can't control those things, but I can control how I feel about myself.
I guess for me, I learned race before I learned color, keeping the age context in place. Turned 50 on the 7th of June. Hit up Gemini. So with that being said, I learned race probably around 5. That's when I learned I was a Black girl and how being Black created its own reality. I learned color when I was 13, and I learned it through a little boy. And what he said to me was, Rhonda, you like the last girl I would ever talk to. At that point, it became, I asked my mom about it. So, greater context, the women on my family are very lighter hued. They each married darker skinned men. So each generation of girls were darker. So when I went to them with that, they were very, it's stupid little boy. Don't worry about that, Rhonda. But as I got older, I recognized that there was a dialogue about it. Full transparency. I cannot honestly say that I have been impacted by colorism. And as I say this, I'm thinking it through. I'm going through my catalog of experiences of being a woman of color. Whenever I think about my impact, it's always been through race and not necessarily hue. So I don't know. Again, full transparency, I can't call why, but this conversation, even on the back end, it is very anxiety producing for me in this moment. I don't know what it is, but it is. So if I sound shy, hence my disclaimer.
Thank you all for sharing. I think for me, I guess the most prominent memory that I have was when I was in elementary school, and my family would talk about how we're Black people, right? And I would get upset because I would have these crayons and I would know, like, this is Black and this is brown. I'm not this dark. This is not me. I'm brown. Don't call me Black. I'm brown. And it took me a while to accept that being Black is okay, and that just because your hue is not the actual literal color of Black, it doesn't mean that you're not, and you should have pride in being Black. And I also remember that I used to love playing tetherball when I was in elementary school. It's a sport that you can play with others and by yourself, but I found that most of the time I was playing by myself, because when other people would come and play with me, it was like, okay, you're too good at this game, and someone else is playing who's lighter than you, so we're going to go run over there and play with them. When I would try to join them and play, they would run away from me. And it took me a while to realize that, like, the reason why they would run away and not play with me is because of how dark my skin was. So I remember coming home that day, taking a bath like I usually do, covering myself in cocoa butter, and then going ahead and covering myself in baby powder, because what I wanted to be was white, because that's how I was going to be accepted. I brought this to my mom, and obviously she cried because she's not used to her child not being happy and accepting who she is. So that was something that sticks with me for a while. And I hope that no one else has to go through that. Branching off of our experiences with colorism, what myths do we hear, or like on social media and things like that, about colorism? And I know some people like to get it confused with racism, but what myths have we all heard? If you've heard any.
I hear more about the myth of, well, it's not really a myth, but it's that preferences are better. Like there's this misconception of what a preference is versus,
That type.
yeah. So it's okay. You can have a preference, but that doesn't mean that you completely exclude another group of people because you're not interested. There is that difference there. So just hearing a lot about preference in versus type. There's just a lot of misconceptions around that. So I think that's one of the myths that's out there. That the preference tends to be better than the other people.
Yeah, I think building on that, like on that preference, especially in like the dating world, like
Mhm.
I typically hear, oh, well, darker skinned women are too loud or they're too ghetto, or oh, like if you have babies with them, their babies are going to have ugly hair, or they're going to be, have, dark colored eyes. Like, oh, I want my child to have lighter skin, curly hair, lighter eyes. And so I've seen a lot of that, of like, it's becoming like a genetics thing of like, oh, if you have a child with a darker skinned woman, your child is going to turn out ugly, or they're going to turn out ghetto, or it's going to be difficult to date a darker skinned woman because, oh, well, they're too loud and they're too domineering. And that was, it's still uncomfortable even to say it to this day, because I'm like, I'm quite quiet. Like, I don't know where y'all are getting that from.
Right.
But it feeds into a lot of even movies. I had a really deep conversation with someone the other day about how I'm kind of tired of how we're portrayed in movies. A lot of even Black owned, Black directed films portray the struggle for darker skinned women. But oh, look, it's a lighter skinned woman with a law firm or a business, and she falls in love with this darker skinned, rich colored looking man. And so I always found it a little strange that darker skin is, synonymized with struggle. And I always found that to be very disturbing, especially in Black directed films, because I think, especially us as Black people, we know that the struggle is, color inclusive. Most people outside of our race don't look at us as light skin, dark skin. They're like, you're just Black, and we're just going to categorize you as that. And so to perpetuate that stereotype within our own community is so harmful. And especially when we have that whole preference conversation, I think it just compounds onto that.
To piggyback on that, I would agree. I've heard those things as well, Annette, about volume being associated with darker hued women. In contrast, I've heard weakness be associated with lighter hued women. I've heard there is a need for them to be taken care of, kept, because they lack the natural resources to do those things themselves. And whereas they may be perceived as more mateable, more able to be coupled, they are also more inclined to be seen more as trophies as opposed to equals. So there is a loss that is received on either end of the spectrum in that regard.
Can a change be made? Like, is there hope or room for reform? And how do we like change the narrative?
Having these types of conversations, I really do think there's an awareness now. And sometimes people go based off their experiences. And so if you don't really have that experience, it may be a little harder to accept or understand. And I'll go back to when we're talking about the movies. And most of the time, you have the love interest as the lighter skinned, um, you know, woman. And it's almost like that narrative of having to be rescued, not being able to, stand on your own, while with the darker woman is portrayed as the strong one, and she has it. There's no need for her to have a love interest because she can handle things on her own. And so it's just that those narratives, are those things really real? Or are those things that we just perceive because it's been that way for so long, and it's been ingrained in us. And that goes back to even when we talk about slavery, where you tend to have the lighter people in the house and the darker people in the field. So are we perpetrating a cycle of things that have been ingrained and taught and learned throughout the years? And then if that's the case, how do we break that now, knowing that these things are not necessarily true or have to be kept? So it's a good question. How do we break those cycles? I think with education, supporting one another, no matter the hue, no matter the diaspora, of where we are in the world, um, and that's a beginning to have those difficult conversations.
I think another opportunity comes in us as women aligning. Um, because in all honesty, I'm not sure who is a great um who creates the greatest line of demarcation between us. If it's or if it is men. Because we can be as hard on each other and as separative on each other than a man ever would even think to. So, in regards to that question, Madison, how can we start? I think it starts within the sisterhood of us as women.
I think it also starts at home too. Like for me, my mom, may she rest in peace, she had a huge influence on, how I started to view myself. She was like a powerhouse of a woman. And she was constantly told, like, you can't get this job in this white school district. They're never going to accept you. And she was like, bet, challenge accepted. Like that was always how she took things. She always, reinforced that ideology in me that, once you have a skill set, once you find out what you're good at, what you are passionate about, who you are as a person, no one can take that away from you. It doesn't matter what people say or what people do. And so I think reinforcing that in the home, especially, as little girls grow older, because I think as I've noticed in these conversations with people who are older than me, that we're starting to like my generation and those, I don't like to consider myself Gen Z, but I guess I fall in there. But I think that my generation is starting to like, I notice my nieces and nephews are noticing color and race a lot earlier than I did. And so having those conversations much earlier, I think even encouraging them to, build in that sisterhood and brotherhood at a young age. I didn't really have my first group of Black friends till college. Like that was the first time I had a Black group of friends. And I think, it's hard in certain communities to be able to do that. But I think whenever you have others that look like you, it can help to break down those stereotypes at a very young age. Because really, as we're growing, we're an amalgamation of everything around us. And so if you're being fed all these lies and stereotypes about you from such a young age, it's going to be much harder to dismantle it when you're 20 compared to when you're like 7. So I think starting at home is really important, especially now that race and color is becoming more salient.
And also, being aware of how we speak as well too. That piggybacks off of what everyone else is saying, is having that supporting each other, being careful how you say things, and in the context of how you say it as well too, and just being positive, encouraging, and uplifting. And I've always had a support group of women in my family, and men too, who have really supported all of my cousins, and my grandmother, who was very quiet woman, but when she had something to say, she said it, and we listened. And so we respected her for that and her experiences over the generations as well too. And we can all learn something from what we've been through our past. Talking, having conversations like this, I think is really good as well too, because it opens up so many things, and to have a respect for someone else's experience and acknowledging that as well too, is important.
What advice would you give your younger self, knowing what you know now about colorism? Take your time. Because only you would know how you felt, and you know stuff now. So, what advice would you give your younger self?
I would say I probably would not have begged my mother to get the box relaxer at the age of 7. Knowing now, about hair and just because even in corporate America, it's like there's this certain these things that you have to do. Where when I would wear my natural hair, it was an issue. And it may not have been said, but I could look on the faces of my supervisors and tell that it was an issue. Or there would be things that were said or done indirectly where I knew, okay, they have a problem with this. But when I had my straighter hair, there were really I saw the changes in the behavior and the dynamic. So I would say just being more confident when I had my natural hair versus my relaxers and my wigs. But now that I'm out of that space, I'm looking at things in different perspective. And it's so sad that we have to have a Crown Act to address hair. That piece of it is just very concerning to me. But going through it, I understand why those legislations are needed. And that speaks volumes of where we are just in general as a society. So I would say just embracing my natural self more in my younger years, because now I'm completely invested in my self-care and my mental health when it comes to my hair and what I look like.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think I'm just gonna echo that. Like the natural hair thing. I think I got box relaxer at age 5. And then I actually had a really bad sew-in my senior year of high school. And so that's what led me to go natural. And then just in January, I started my locks. They're just under, our little friend today because it's due for a retwist. But um, the lock journey for me has really helped me to just be so much more confident in my hair. And I really wish I had embraced my natural hair at a much younger age, because it's my hair. It's my hair. I don't, I get why my mom did it. Part of it was because she had another, my sister, who also has very thick, coarse, 4C hair. And so I think her being, um, the stay-at-home mom and having to deal with 2 thick haired girls, it was just like, maybe for convenience, let's put some relaxer in. But I think had I embraced it a lot earlier, it would have trickled down into other things, because now I'm so into like my natural hair, my locks, even natural skincare, buying even Black owned skincare and Black owned hair products, because I'm invested in it now. And I know it's part of who I am. And I think it even helps to facilitate conversation. I think if more of my conversations when I was younger was educating instead of defending, I think it would have led to a lot less of that stereotyped conversation, because, a lot of my friends didn't know any better. They were just repeating whatever they heard, but I didn't have anything to give them to change the narrative and to change their mindset. So now that I have those tools, I wish I had them earlier, but it really had to have started from me realizing, like, no, this is my hair. I love my hair. You don't see anybody else telling other people to change their hair. So why am I having to do it? So I think I would have liked to have told myself that at probably age 7 or 8.
For me, I guess I was always in the middle. I was too dark to be considered light. I was too light to be considered dark. So that would fit. So I would tell myself that it's okay. You don't have to have a label. Regardless of how people perceive you or see you, you're good. You don't need anything other than to know that you're good.
It's a lot to unpack there. um, Before we start opening up to our viewers for questions and things like that, I think it's important that we address the new elephant in the room with Roe versus Wade being taken back, and how us as Black women weren't getting proper health care, or healthcare needs or seen like that, especially when it came to pregnancies and things like that. Um, Colorism, in my opinion, I feel plays a big role in that. And since abortions have been considered illegal federally now, I think it's going to be even harder. Um, but obviously, I'm too young to know anything really about that. I'm only 19, so I'm looking to you guys as like my mentors, and tell me what process you're going through, like what's your thought process and how you think it'll affect you guys and other people that you know in your peer group.
I am officially out. Well, I guess biologically I'm not, but for my purposes, socially, I'm long out the game of child producing. However, I do have a daughter who is 20, 25 next month, and she has a daughter. So I shudder at the idea of the opportunities that I had in my childbearing years are being pulled for both my daughter and my granddaughter. So they will grow up in an environment that is more akin to what my mother grew up in. So watching the progression and then the regression of laws that benefit us as women is a very unsettling experience.
It's been a tough couple of weeks in this space, mainly because I've always been in a weird space with this, and I'm not going to get political and share my opinions because it's not the space for that. But really, my concern is that, whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, I think the conversation is clear that resources are lacking for the Black community in general. And just all my research I've done with Black maternal death rates, I mean, it's only going to get worse. Foster care agencies, adoption agencies are too expensive for anybody to even want to help. And we are really limited in what we can do because now our economy is not to where we can start handing out, extra resources. And so I just think that we're really in a time right now where we need to just come together and pool our resources, whether that be, doulas, making it easier for doulas to become certified, making it easier for individuals to receive mom boxes, boxes that have like diapers, formula, because I mean, we're also in a formula shortage. So I can't even imagine what that's doing right now. But then also, with the church, like I'm a Christian, for example, and I think the church needs to step up, and, start volunteering, start donating money, start, providing, spiritual services, even psychological services if they have that ability. Because I think it's time now for us to integrate. We're not all of us have that privilege to be 5 minutes down the road from a very high quality hospital that can give you integrated care services. I mean, there's countless stories of women who have been turned away because, oh well, your symptoms are not that bad. Oh well, they're not life threatening at the moment, and we see who that disproportionately affects. And so I think it's just we've reached that point where having a fight about who's right and wrong is done. We need to come to a point of taking action and doing something beyond just going back and forth, because I think people are going to stand where they're going to stand. People are going to be where they're going to be. But now what? Are we going to leave these women who don't have a choice to have a conversation to suffer because we're too interested in being right and wrong? So that's, before I get into a rant mode, that's where I'm going to stand. I think it's just time for us to integrate and build and serve. I think really we need to be in a service mode right now instead of a political jargon mode at this point.
I 100% agree. with that. And as a licensed therapist, I have, people who are concerned about their right to choose. And I'm not going to get into the political aspect of it, but I will say that people are concerned now. And if you can overturn this, what else can be overturned? Those laws that are precedent and things that have already been decided on, what else can be overturned? I think is where the concern is as well. And regarding to Roe v. Wade, we, the community, have to start stepping up in collaboration. And there are communities and people that are doing those things to help, bridge that gap with formula, with providing the mental health services, with providing support, with providing care packages for new mothers and new families. So there are things that are being done. I just think that now it needs to be, even more ramped up in these times. But because right now there's lack of funding, there's lack of so many things, access. So there are people in the community that are going to these where these individuals are, and that's part of our service and support that we should be committed to. There's things that happen that are beyond our control, but we can control what we can control, and that's to provide those services and support as a community, because we can do so much more collectively and on a collaboration level.
Can I say one more thing too about Madison before you shift to the next one?
Mhm.
When we talk about Roe v. Wade, we're generally talking about after the woman has become pregnant. I would like to offer also there is an opportunity for us to get much more specific and diligent on the whole process of our reproductive health, not just post conception. I'm amazed at how many young women are unaware of how the whole process of conception works, so that there are situations where they are literally caught. It's not because even when you hear mothers talk, the more younger mothers, millennial mothers, they have the same conversations that my mother and her mother had with her, which is keep your legs closed, don't get pregnant, as if it's a wand that prevents sperm at that point. No one is having the actual dialogue associated. No one, you can ask anyone. Matter of fact, I would encourage even you, Annette, as a 24-year-old woman, because you're in the age of technology, you really have access to way more information, even than Dr. Scott. I would encourage you to ask your friends to name 5 forms of contraception. And I would be curious to know how they can give you 5. They may give you 5 different pill names, but I'm curious to know if anybody can give you 5 distinct forms of contraception. That being said, we have a duty as women to teach women, well, to learn as women how to best protect ourselves, so we don't even have to deal, because the legal Roe versus Wade deals with the legal piece. It don't do nothing with the psychological piece. It does nothing with the emotional piece. So to avoid even having to make that decision, our opportunity comes in learning how to prevent the need for that to even come up.
Thank you. We're going to add Esther to the conversation. She's one of our co-hosts for Teen Mental Health as well. So Esther, what thoughts do you have just in general about colorism and their effects on Black girls and their self-esteem?
I think that really it's a difficult matter because as a Black woman, I feel like I have to try even harder. I feel like I need to portray someone else instead of being me, really. It's more like it can be really personal matter too and a societal matter as well. Because you're trying to really fit into a society that doesn't really accept you because you're different, because you're your skin color. You know?
I agree. So now we're gonna open it up to comments. Um, just see if anyone has any questions or anything that they want to share with the group. Um, so we'll give a moment on that. While we wait, Esther, do you have any personal experiences with colorism as when you were growing up?
I remember, I guess when I was little, I feel like in grade school I had to prove something to others, really. I remember, I guess, on test or something like that, I had to prove to my teachers that I had it all together, but really didn't since most of my teachers are white. Yeah.
I do just want to piggyback off of what Dr. Shirley said regarding thinking about the before as well too, and that's where that collaboration, those supports come into, because we also have to be educated on the whole process. And sometimes we do get stuck focusing on one specific area when there are so many things that, what about prevention? We don't really talk about the prevention piece and focus on that. And even though we have all of this access and, resources, that is part of it. So I'm thankful for the organizations that are providing that, and also providing free what do you call it, condoms and different things, so that people in the community can just, come in, get what they need, and leave the facility, and nobody has to know, because it's also about the confidentiality and, the uneasiness of talking about these things as well too. So I wholeheartedly agree with the prevention and the educational piece, and that's why these conversations are very important to have.
Yeah, I think to add, like in undergrad, my senior year, I worked at the Health and Wellness Center at UT Dallas, or the Student Wellness Center at UT Dallas, and we did a lot of sex education. And it's sad that I have to admit this, but I was 22 at the time, and that was my first time learning about contraception. I did not know that condoms were a form of contraception. I didn't know that because I was never given that conversation as a kid. I was just told, don't go out here sleeping with nobody. And that's it. And I'm like, great. And then you go into college and everyone's like, go sleep with everybody. So, and so then, I'm like, ugh. And so, that was the first time that I learned about, sex, like any kind of sex education. And when I was having to teach these modules and workshops to freshmen, they were like, oh, I didn't know that these things. And I'm like, they're 18. And so I think that conversation is very important. And I don't think it's fair or okay that I had to wait until I was 22 before and had to take it as a job before I finally learned what this stuff was. Like, that conversation should have been had, I would even say, in middle school, because that's when it starts. I hate to break it to parents out there who are watching, but it starts that early, sometimes a little earlier. But I think the conversation is awkward. It's weird. No one wants to have that conversation with an 11-year-old, but it's important because, especially now with media and TikTok and Twitter just being easily available, they're seeing everything. Like, when I was 11, I was not seeing that kind of stuff. Now it's everywhere. And so if we're not having those conversations and having that education piece early, people are going to find out from sources that are not reliable, or find out from people who don't have their best interest. And so I think, I think it just emphasizes the importance of doing it. And, I think there's an age appropriate way to do it at different stages. You don't need to go into the full throttle detail for a 12-year-old, but there is some basic sex education that needs to be had. And it needs to be comprehensive. It doesn't need to be, don't do this and don't do that. Teach them their options. Teach them, what's out there, and, what's the best course of action. But also, as a parent, to just make yourself as a trusted confidant, to where if they do make a mistake or they don't know what to do, they feel safe to come to you and have that conversation, instead of, ooh, I don't know if I should tell my parents because, I don't want them to think I'm some kind of way. Just have that honest conversation and build that trust. Because I think, if I had that level of trust, with my parents, I think that conversation would have been much easier to have at a much younger age, instead of figuring it out in the open and wide field that is the college campus. So
I had a similar experience to that. But like, my sex education progressed. It started like with the pads and things like that in 6th grade. And then in 7th grade, we started learning that condoms exist and this is how babies are made. And then by the time I got to junior year, no, it was senior year, I took child development. And that's when I learned more about the different types of contraceptives that are out there. And it wasn't until I moved to Florida and went to an open mic night at a cafe to where I saw what the packaging of condoms and female condoms look like, because I didn't know that there was a thing like that. And it's kind of weird to me that it was just out there for display in the back of the cafe for anyone who just needed one. Because that's not something that you see every day. We have a comment that I would like to share. It's from Karen. He says, I've noticed colorism in public school system as both a parent and a teacher. I have 3 children. My youngest child is a bit darker than his older brother and sister. All 3 children are similar in temperament, yet the youngest experienced more discipline issues. I had to have him removed from his 5th grade teacher's class. Colorism, racism, and microaggressions are situations our children have to navigate at a young age. Thoughts on that? Anyone wants to share?
Yes, actually, I was reading an article and doing some research because my dissertation focused on the reentry of African American men after incarceration. And one of the things that I looked at was the disproportionate minority contact, where there are different aspects of microaggressions, racism throughout these systems and throughout our experiences. And I believe the research says that, especially those who are darker may experience 5 microaggressions a day, or 5 experiences of racism or some form of discrimination that affects them mentally. Depression, anxiety, always being anxious, if I'm doing something wrong, or no matter what I say, no matter what I do, something is going to happen or someone's going to say something. And so that is definitely prevalent, even when you're talking about the school to prison pipeline. Black boys, the Black females are more likely to be disciplined, within juvenile justice. They're sent there versus their white counterparts who do mostly arbitration. They meet with a mediator, and then the charges are either dismissed or they do community service, and then that's the end of that. But with our children, they are put into juvenile justice systems, and then you have all this other stuff that happens. So that is definitely a trend.
Yeah, in my master's program that I'm about to finish, so excited. I have been doing my research is in juvenile justice, particularly neighborhood factors and psychosocial factors. And one of the things that I've noticed is actually there's quite a lack of research, especially in Black young girls. But the little I could find and the little I've done myself, I've seen that not only are Black and brown girls more likely to be incarcerated in the juvenile justice system, they're also at higher risk for developing, mental health concerns. They're also more at risk for developing STIs and even getting pregnant while incarcerated. And once they're having to be put back into the community after, adjudication, they're just kind of put out there and they're told, well, go back to school and find a job. And it's like, okay, you're telling a 17-year-old who is pregnant with a child to just go back out there and go back to school and have a job with what resources, with what mentorship, with what, access to mental care services, even healthcare services. Does she even have anyone to go back to is the other question. Because a lot of these children are welfare system or foster care system children. And so there really is, a colorism and racism aspect, especially now we're seeing at such a young age. And so kind of like what we were talking about earlier of just really getting into that collaborative space as a community to really be able to help our own children, because there's just unfortunately not a lot the government is doing to provide that support, especially in an affordable manner. And so it's unfortunately, but in a way, fortunately, down to us. I mean, we know these people, we're in that community, we live with them. And so I think, yeah, I mean, the research I'm doing just confirms exactly that we're seeing a lot of that disproportionately affecting our Black and brown youth.
I'm glad we started the conversation a little bit on the juvenile justice system, because that's our next show. Thanks to Annette. So we'll see. Hopefully we'll have this same panel again. We'll talk about the juvenile justice system and its interconnection with mental health. Thank you so much to our guests and to our co-host Hester, who joined us a little later today. I'm Madison McNair, and hope you guys enjoy the rest of your weekend.